a miracle. You just
Thank
keep
you,
hitting
baby.
buttons. Yeah, thank you, baby Jesus. Man, I gotta tell you, I love you so much.
You're gone.
I love the dude you are. I love our friendship. I love the things that we've been and gone and done. Even if we haven't worked together side by side, we get one another. And I don't know if people understand that. So just big old love letter from me to you. I love you, John Green. I just think you're the best.
You're a sweetie. You're sweet. I'm just gonna say that.
So this is the
Right
thing
back
I
at
want to
you.
get.
Right back at
So here's what I want to explain to everybody. Your ability to work in conflict zones is comparable to mine. I have respect for the work that you've done because we approach these problems differently. Now, you've been on the show several times talking about that. But the one thing
you.
I don't know is, well, one, there is no badge or pin or tab that we can put on our uniform or even on our resume to say, you need to hire John or you need to hire Pete because they are full force multipliers of the first order, right?
Yeah.
They don't have that thing where it's like, hey, all commanders pay attention. And I don't know what that thing would be, but what is the thing that we have? Like if we could make a tab or a pin or a badge that would say, wow, holy shit, you have that? You can do that? What would that thing be, do you think?
I think the first thing would be initiative.
Okay.
There's just an innate, and maybe the same root, innate initiative is the ability or the willingness, not the ability, the willingness to uh, objectively view what's happening in space and be willing
Mm,
to accept the other party's rationale. So there's a willingness to first is initiative, because there are a lot of people who just will stay in the box, man, and they are what I call union workers. They're just, I'm
yeah.
on deployment and my job is to get up and do this thing, and I'm going to eat and go to the gym, and I'm going to work on my online education, and that's what I'm doing. That's 60% of the force, whether you want to admit it. That's probably based on my experience. That's 60% of the
Yeah.
guys. And
Especially
then
even if yeah.
there's so initiative matters. One, two, a willingness to accord the enemy or the threat or the different cultural groups living in that space, to accord them their version of the truth. After all, we're going into their space,
Yeah.
and we're frequently trying to make their space more like our space. And so the first thing you have to do is understand them and what their incentives are, why they behave. You can have tribal incentives, you can have economic incentives, you can have religious incentives, so, sociocultural, however you want to break that down. So you got to have some initiative, be willing to accept the version of the truth with regard to how the world works from the locals' perspective.
Hmm.
And then I'm not going to say a blatant disregard for the rules, but
But
you
you're not
have
going
to
to not say it.
you have to accept the fact that the U.S. is a developed bureaucracy. We've been around as a country for 200 years. DoD's been around either as a Department of War or now DoD for a long time, and we just have an F ton of rules. And increasingly, those rules are created to stifle initiative
Mm,
because somebody did X and they made a mistake and something bad happened. And
yeah.
since the bad thing happened, DoD or Army or whatever branch creates a rule, or state, Department of State, USA, they create a rule that says you can't do that without permission. So you almost have to have a willingness to just take the initiative, do some stuff, and go meet some dudes and some dudettes and
Yeah.
accept their version of the truth. And then once you do that, you can actually figure out what their baseline is and compare it to where your commander wants to go, and then have an honest discussion about how to either split the baby or get to yes or create a win-win, or just admit, yo, we're too far apart on this, and some bullets are going to start to fly.
Yeah.
That's kind of it.
Let me
Yeah.
add a couple elements. One is, have you seen this show Poker Face or heard about it?
I have not.
It's got
No.
Natasha Lyonne. It's on Peacock, and you watch
It's
that. And
on,
her thing is
it's on Peacock.
she can look at you talking, and she goes bullshit because she knows that you're full of shit. We have that ability. So the slide will come up, and someone's like, Commander, let me orient you to my slide, and
Yeah.
we're going to X, which will lead to Y, which gives us result Z. And I can look at that, you can look at it, and I go, that's bullshit. And so that's my tasking.
Yeah.
That's my information request. Like, can I prove what this team, whether they're the ag team, the rule of law team, the religious engagement team, the FET team, whatever, any team it is, the battalion, the platoon, we're going to go out and we're going to engage and we're going to teach and train the populace. Okay, and what are we going to do? We teach and train the police. That's a common goal. Okay, well, then I should be able to find people that want to call this world class police force that we're training here in this far off land. And then when I go into town and I'm like, hey, I'm talking to the boss right now. Hey, no one's going to call these cops. They don't believe in anything that we're talking
Yeah.
about, right? And so we have to not only
Let's
accept their truth, we have to challenge our own truth.
absolutely. The latter is probably more important than the former.
Mm,
The challenging our own truth, and you see this. What do they say? The definition of insanity is to repeat the same mistake again and
yeah,
again.
yeah, yeah,
Right now, there are discussions in D.C. about uh, Ukraine reconstruction. Um, and you would have thought that after the cigar, all the really good work and hard work the cigar's done on analyzing our reconstruction or maybe our construction effort, our nation
right.
building effort in Afghanistan and Mania and in Iraq. We had sicker in Iraq. They didn't last very long, but cigars the
Mm,
enduring one. But same same unmitigated failure in Iraq we had in Afghanistan.
yeah,
And I've been to a couple of these conferences or symposiums, whatever the heck they're called, in DC about Ukrainian reconstruction. And it's the same old BS, man. It's people talking about we need a local level initiative to empower people to have a voice in reconstruction. No, what they need
yeah,
is a Marshall Plan at the macro level, executed at the macro level to enable pre-existing businessmen who actually know how to do business to rebuild
right.
business.
Yeah,
Now, are there challenges in that space? Because we would call them corrupt. I would say they're not corrupt. They just are living in 1900 US. And we would have called Rockefeller an oligarch and Carnegie an oligarch.
right.
And,
Yeah,
Leland Stanford was known as Steelan Lanford, right? He was an oligarch. And
yeah,
so, Stanford, way to go, trees. Anyway, your founder was a freaking thief. Anyway,
yeah, yeah,
so let's get rid of those statues, right? So anyway, I hear it's the same old stuff, and I'm gonna stop ranting, but
no, this is,
it's the
but we're
willingness
talking,
to
yeah,
our way does not fit that space.
mm,
So it needs to be when they talk about sweat equity and local leadership and all that, it's true. It does.
yeah,
But you cannot create new power structures through the process of reconstruction because that's too tumultuous. And what you'll get people who want to use civil rights to create new power structures in the Ukraine that never existed before. And since we're fabricating those or we're propping them up with external income or external cash flows into that space, the second the
right.
money's gone, they're going to fail. We tried to create an Iraqi army based on a Western model. And when ISIS got their stuff together in 13 and got rolling by 14, 60% of the Iraqi army divisions we had just spent a decade training took their uniforms off, dropped their weapons, and went home
Yeah,
because they weren't buying what we forced their government to say they were selling. We're doing the same thing in Syria with Al Hol and repatriation of families from Syria into Iraqistan. Uh, the Iraqis aren't buying it, and the
right.
Americans know they're not buying it. But what they'll do is they'll go get some Iraqis who will go, oh yeah, yeah, this is fine, provided you create a $10 million rule of law program that we can lead and make sure that there's due process for all these people coming back, and there's a really thorough check done on them, which is going to take millions and a lot of time. Anyway, Coleman
Yeah.
rant stops. Yeah.
when we do look at these things, we all have our baby. Like I'm working on a paper right now, and it's going to basically be the moment chaplains are either doing intel work to analyze what the mosque is saying, or the imam or the mullah,
Yeah.
or the minute they leave camp to go engage with religious leaders because they are one, we are now in a zone of bad ethics. And this is the same program over and over again, whether it's engaging females, which have already been published on over and over again. So you have these things where you can write this wonderful paper. No, studies show that when women are employed and blah 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 and yabbity yabbity and all these dreams come through, that is great, that is wonderful, and I would love to know how we could possibly do that, but we don't know. Why don't we know? We don't know because nobody's qualified to go work in that space, to break the rules,
Like,
to go into town. Nobody's qualified to do that. Two, nobody's qualified to go and let them like use their way to get our goal accomplished. Like just use like a social judo. We don't develop that professional capacity, so we can't in any way reliably get to that outcome that we're desperate to do because we believe it's good. Because we're taking something that doesn't exist. We're bringing uranium to a village in Africa and saying your problems are solved,
yeah,
and they're like, we're I need squash, I need, like farmers. This is what they always said to me, John. They said, feed and seed. You want to help me? Feed and seed. That's what I
yeah,
need. I don't need your help bringing in crops. I don't need feed and seed. That'll help me. And so we would bring the same solution to the ANA, or the Iraqi army. Either ones, we would come, and the next unit come be like, "This is how you shoot basic rifle marksmanship." Like, you guys taught us this 10 years in a row. We're bored to tears with that. You're not taking us seriously. You're not pushing us in any way. And is that easy to do? No,
yeah.
it's not easy to get those guys to go in the right direction. But they
Okay.
were so frustrated with our repetition and lack of progress. How many times did I watch a unit come in and go, "This is how you do a sand table," and then we would go on our own patrol, never do a sand
Yeah,
table once?
yeah,
These things don't go together and equal growth and success. So when we do this inevitably in Ukraine, we were talking yesterday about Ukraine and Russia and China, and we're bad at turning off war, and we're bad at
yeah,
transitioning to them. And I've written a paper on that, like transition operations. How do you slowly step back? Hey, partner led. Okay, great. How do you just get all the way out of it? How do you know, like, when you're going to leave an area forever, you go to the mayor, you go to the governor, you say, "What do you need in the next 6 months? We are going to leave." And then you look at their face, and they're like, "Holy shit, you're leaving for real?" And I'm like, "For real, really?" Because I've done this a couple of times. So I'm like, "I don't have any electricity. I don't have any food. I don't have a budget. I don't. And there's all these systematic failures. You're like, "All right, listen, I'd get the fuck out of here because we're really leaving."
yeah. Well, here's a starting point. Don't try to don't try to create something when you're leaving that they never had before, because they can't sustain it.
Yeah.
Can't
Yeah.
sustain it. So we mean well, but if they didn't have it before we got there, don't try to leave it,
Yeah.
because again, we left a bunch of schools in Afghanistan and Iraq, and half of them when we left didn't have teachers because they never had a
Right.
school there before.
Yeah.
They didn't have a school before. So what can they sustain in that space when we're gone? They can sustain in that space what they had before we left. So again, a more macro view rather than a micro view. Now I'm going to tell you what the village elder wants. It may not bleep and matter because he never had it before. So is he playing you to get something out of you before you leave so that he later can sell it, right?
Yeah.
Uh, how many generators did we give to people who never had generators before, and you left, and 90 days later the generator was gone? So
Yeah.
so nation building is a generational process. It takes generations to happen,
Yeah.
and it's got to be driven by the locals. It's got to be driven by those guys. So when we executed the Marshall Plan in Germany, the plan in Japan, uh, we rebuilt factories, pre-existing factories, and we put people back to work in the same factories, run by the same Germans, and they had long-term loans. was a long-term, low-interest loan, or a this for that. You're going to make stuff in that factory. You're going to sell it to the United States, and we get a discount on the price to pay back the loan, lend lease, that sort of thing. So I think, again, I think we have to have, if you've written on it, the first thing to start with is we always talk about feasible and suitable. There are a lot of plans that just are not feasible because we're trying to leave it better than you found it. Well, you leave it better than you found it, and they can't sustain the better. You just, again, you're feeding into the war economy, right? Or the reconstruction economy. And you're going to have inflation. You're going to have all these second, third order economic effects that are bad.
Yeah.
So there's a science and there's an art. And I think we fail at the science as well as at the art. So
We're
you know,
also, for all the badassery that we have, we now have amphibious C-130s. Obviously, SEAL teams are badass.
yeah,
But if you and I walked up to the boss and said, because my buddy Rich and I, we tried to do this, like, hey, you have all these KTMs that are on the fence line that no one ever takes anywhere. If we could just get, I don't know, like, if you don't want to give us a security detail, that's fine. But let us use well, those belong to the Afghans. Yeah, but they don't ever ride them ever. And
here's
we've asked them, and they said we can have them. You know,
here's
and
an
and they're like, "What's that?"
here's an idea. Privatize
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, that
Privatize.
too, right? Yeah.
No,
When you work in a conflict zone
if
that's non-permissive, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, it hasn't worked. DOD has not been successful at this using
Mm-mm.
people in uniforms. Just haven't. And now they want to do near peer fighting because low intensity conflict is effing hard to do, and they know
Yeah,
they're good at lethal, and they spend money on non lethal. I don't really know any place where we've had a major non lethal victory in 20 years. You know,
yeah.
and we say we're doing full spectrum operations, but I'd love to see a place that was really had their back. They had their back against the wall, and we had a great non-lethal victory that resulted in long-term stability. What we did in Afghanistan did not result in long-term stability. It did not happen in Iraq. Those are the major areas we've been in. A lot of places in Africa were smart enough to not get involved in trying to create long-term stability through civil affairs. So
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think you need people who are not bound by the rules that state aid and DoD are bound by. That's what I think, and they assume the risk to go do it. Now they're going to have to be paid well to go do it in that space, or they just have to
Mhm.
be true believers. And you can find some true believers, you know.
Yeah.
But then it's
Yeah.
what's the contract for, and how do you measure stability? Decrease in violence, decrease in infant, mortality, increase in, I don't know. You pick.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, literacy.
Right. Yeah. And also the occasional blow up that requires the State Department
Yeah,
or some military unit to come in and pull your butt out of the fire or scoop up what's left or acts of reprisal. Because you and I can work carefully, deliberately, but
yeah,
bad days happen out there. And also bad judgment happens. You're working in a stressful environment. There's no way, like you and I both know, 20-hour days all the time, all the damn time, and you're working beyond your limits. And so sometime you might
yeah,
go out and have a couple too many cocktails as you blow off the steam or whatever it is, right? And
yeah,
and you have to accept that that kind of blow up is going to happen as you try to do this impossible work.
yeah. And but eyes wide open sort of thing. That's grown-ups have those discussions before they go do this, and that is that you're on your own. Um, and what we might learn is that in a lot of places we just shouldn't be there
Yeah.
because it's not ready for us to be there. We can't save everyone everywhere all the time because a lot of them they're not buying what we're selling. They want to be saved in the way we want to save them, right? They just see us as access to resources until such time as we go away and they've hopefully increased their relative power position towards others who are their competitors, and they're happy. So, uh,
Yeah.
you know, should a bunch of 30-year-old people raised in Pennsylvania, New York, and Texas, and educated at UT, Penn State, Towson State, go to East Africa and try to tell them how to do it better?
Oh,
Maybe.
no.
Now, maybe it's you only work through local influencers and empower the local influencers. And the problem is we created these laws that say local influencers have to pass a background check and be
Hmm.
pristine and pure and perfect, or we will not work with them.
Yeah.
And the challenge is that in the space they live in, they can't live by our ethics. They can't live by our morals.
Right.
And
That's not,
so
you
that
can't survive there. Yeah.
you wouldn't make it. You wouldn't make it.
Yeah.
So again, maybe that's deliberate, and we created the laws to say, hey, we're not supposed to be working there. But sadly, presidents will say, go over there and do this thing, and you get stuck.
The
You
thing
get
we lose
hamstrung,
track
as they
of
say.
is that
I don't know.
they're better at instability than we are.
Yeah,
And so, what is normal for them, and we're glad to come and we always point the finger of corruption at somebody else, but we're the corrupter. And you bring this extra money and these extra
I
resources, and you don't work within the scope of them, their ability. Of course, they're going to take
I read
advantage because
that.
there's not enough stuff.
Yeah, I've read guys who say we're the corrupter, right? That kind of thing. And I can see both sides, right? I can see the argument that we go in and we create inflation and we push. There's no, there's no, the throughput is too high for the locals to be able to absorb. They call it the absorption rate, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
I can understand that.
Well, and also they have an
And it's
existing
true from a
system.
perspective. It's also equally true. Yeah, but that's right. But it's also equally true that we do have our own national strategy, and we're trying to achieve our national strategy. And to the degree we can, we get to do that. So it cuts both ways. We're not there for altruism. Okay. The Chinese are not in Africa because they're altruistic.
No.
The Russians, Wagner is not in Africa because they're altruistic. We're not there because we're altruistic either. And
Yeah.
so if we are the corruptors, so are the Chinese. And anybody who's an external force operating in that space, has an agenda. They got an
Yeah.
agenda, and we can be
I
honest
think
about that. I don't think we're honest about the agenda sometimes. Maybe we should be more honest.
it's, and when I say that we're the corrupter, it's true because they have a system and we come to seek to change it. We're also the insurgents because we're trying to, like, we fight coin, but we're the ones who are trying to change the government, right? So we have to take these lenses and apply them to what we're doing and say, how do we do less? How do we do this with less resources? And I'm not saying hamstring your people, but when the sergeant major shows up and is like, we're going to build an NCO academy, like, okay, but that is irrelevant, inappropriate. When the general shows up and says, we're going to rebuild the bazaar, shut up, get
Yeah,
out of here. Let us get back to work on the things that are small and delicate and that we can slowly foster some kind of connection. But we don't. We have these
yeah. We had
grandiose
this.
ideas.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we had this conversation before. That's not going to happen because we're working on a 1-year budget, and your op order is usually a 1-year op order, and you have
Yeah.
specific goals, that sort of stuff. So
Yeah.
so there's no incentive for a battalion commander who wants to become a brigade commander and on up the line
Right.
to say, I'm taking a 5-year approach and I'm going to do 1/5 and then I'm going to leave.
Yeah.
Uh,
Right.
which again, maybe is why you want to privatize it. And XYZ Corp is there. And I don't mean the lethal stuff.
Yeah. Right.
I
Right.
don't mean that. I
Yeah.
mean the engagement stuff, the information collection, not intelligence collection, the information collection, and the interaction at the local level. We'll just say local at the tactical level, but the local level, not military says tactics, local otherwise, because state is not engaging at the local level. They don't have enough foreign service officers to do it. So at the embassy, if you have 15 FSOs, those FSOs are meeting high-level persons in that space.
Mm-hmm.
And what we learned with Afghanistan is that the Taliban kicked our rear at diplomacy because they had people at the local level. They sent out teams, swarms of negotiators to sit down village by village and say, okay, look, this is the end game. This is how we see it playing out. We don't need another 10 years of war. We're ready to fight for 10 more years. There's no reason for your grandkids to keep dying for this thing. And they got the
Right.
elders on board. Department of State, not their fault, probably. They don't have the budget and they don't have the personnel to go out and counter that. And so some American is saying, well, we rely on the Afghan army to do that. Well, clearly the Afghan army didn't believe in our notion of Afghanistan, much less their own notion of Afghanistan, because they took their uniforms off for the most part and went home, except for the special forces guys who fought very valiantly. A lot of the Afghans, sadly, walked off.
And it wasn't a surprise
So
that they
again,
did.
no, if you're going to enable, unless you're going to enable state, more robust state with a real budget, and they're going to loosen their rules on security because they're terrified if anybody gets hurt, it's a national emergency, right? Oh my God, the world
Right.
came to an end. Somebody got hurt.
Yeah.
Unless you're going to change it, I say, come up with a new organization or privatize it, one or the other, of people who are trained. And you can't start this at 20. You start this at 30 or 40, like we do with FA,
Mm-hmm.
the FAOs. You
Right.
start with people who have a professional education in something that's relevant in the space they're going to go. Oh, you're an engineer. Yeah, you might get it. Oh, you're no kidding, a plumber. You're an electrician. Electricians, man, ton of value in the developing
Yeah.
world if you know electricity. So you need to be 30 or older and have some real life experience that's relevant for the people on the ground. Have the initiative, a little bit of a risk taker, rule breaker kind of guy,
Sure.
and be willing to listen to the other person's perspective. And then you can have a conversation. And if you can
I
have a
don't.
conversation, you can tell what's going on.
That the school to become a FAO or any kind of foreign engagement person, it's rigorous, and I don't know that we need people from Georgetown or the Kennedy School of Government. We need regular folks that went to state school. We need folksy folks who can go somewhere and they're not going to be like, I don't understand, like, yeah, these guys get by. This guy sells gas because that's what's going to pay the fucking bills tonight. We're going to go by
Yeah,
Johnny Cash. Everybody's a worried man in these places, and you need to figure out when it's your stuff and when it's not your stuff, and to learn and to not be the smartest, most educated person in the room because you're not in that world. You're in a different world.
right, right. Well, I won't. I used to bang more on the Ivy League than I do now. I don't think it matters so much, where you come from, except it's fun to bang on the Ivy League. Um, just so long as you have some seasoning. Like I said, don't start at 22. Have some seasoning, and have some skills that translate to that space where you're going. If you're a doctor, man, home run. If you're a nurse,
Golden,
home
right?
run. If you are, an electrician, a plumber, a truck mechanic, a guy who runs a trucking company, that sort of stuff. You have a natural entree into a community. And since you can get into that community, that's access and placement into that community. And if you have initiative, you'll expand your access and placement into new communities. You start out as talking to dudes about electricity and safety. And then from there,
Yeah,
you're talking to builders and developers. And from there, you're talking to lawyers. And from there, you're talking to shipping companies. It's how you do it, right? And you're not asking for permission to go meet people.
right.
You're just getting in a car and going. And so you're assuming risk, or yeah, you're assuming risk. And then if something bad happens to you, everybody's got to know, yeah, we all know something bad could happen. And
If
that's,
if
you
uh
know,
if you're going to set it up and privatize this thing, which I think is smart, the at least worth considering how much we continue to lose. There are 34 provinces in, is it 34 provinces in Afghanistan?
yeah,
It's a lot of provinces, right? And then within that there are a lot of districts. Let's say that there's I don't know, 15. So whatever that 15 times 34 number is, you need at least that many people. And sometimes you need two per district because there's a mountain range between that and as much as we want them to
That's
be in
right.
one district, they're really not. So let's say that that number is a few more than that. But could you just send one person out and say your task in year one is to create
Sorry, could you say
relationships?
what?
Your task in year one is to create relationships and trust with 50 different people. And just keep it simple like
That's
that.
right.
Like just go see who you can meet on the
That's right.
provincial council, see who you can meet in the villages,
That's
and
right.
just work that village and become, don't offer anything, don't just work on building trust that first year. And then we'll rejigger from there. Maybe we move someone out of an area because they overstep or whatever it is. But I think that there's a real program there that you could run. And look, it's not going to cost $1 trillion to do it, but it's not going to be free either, right? And it's going to, you're
Yeah.
going to be like, what are we getting out of this? Well, you now know this many 10,000
Yeah.
people, and then that person's going to stay there, and they're going to become proficient in Urdu, Pashto, Dari, all of them. But they're going to become a player in that environment. But they can't leave. They go on vacation, but they got to come back and get back to work.
Yeah. I'm not quibbling,
Yeah.
but when you say like your first year, you're not offering something, the one thing you can always offer local is the truth.
Mm,
This is the truth. This is how the Americans really see it. This is what they're really going to do.
right.
If they tell you this, don't count on it. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
They don't have the budget for it. Sometimes that's the answer. They don't have the budget for it, or there's no way the Americans are ever going to support that.
Yeah.
When I was on my last, I'm just going to say my last deployment, I was working with some guys, and the government they worked for was not moving west. It was moving east
Okay.
politically. And they repeatedly would say, "John, man, we need we need a coup. We need a coup now. And you guys need to help us like what happened in Egypt. Y'all they call it the Egyptian solution. You need to help us with the Egyptian solution. We need it now." And I would go, "Man, I love you. The US is never going to support that. Don't
Yeah.
do not delude yourself into believing the US will ever support that. That's not who we are culturally. If it happens and we benefit from it, we usually will take a step back and go, oh, we're really mad about it. And then, you know, over a 5 year period of time, we will re-engage and redevelop relationships, right?
Yeah.
But uh, at least once a week, and it was the young Turks, the captains and the majors and the lieutenant colonels. We need the solution. And then once in a while, you get a general, and they go, "Hey, man, we need a coup. Americans will never support it." So they did not like to hear that, but
Mm,
they knew I would always tell them the truth. Here's the truth. It's not going to happen. So don't waste your time on it. Same thing with budgeting. We need X. Americans are never going to pay for it. Don't waste
right.
your time. Why? But you got to be able to explain why. You have to know why. You have to know the fiscal reason, the contracting reason, the policy reason, the Department of State reason, the DOD reason. You have to explain all the reasons. And a 23-year-old person, they're awesome. They're probably not going to get it because they just
No.
haven't had enough iterations of failure. You got to have iterations of failure within the bureaucracy to know what doesn't work.
Yeah.
You got to go,
Yeah.
that won't work. Why? Because
You
this is
know.
where it's going to fail.
Yeah. Oh, there's a
Does that make
USAID program for that. No, there's not. You think that there is.
no?
It's a blind item. You can push the button, but that money ain't never coming. Yeah. Um,
Exactly. Never going to get here. It's never going to get to you.
never to get to
Why to
you,
get to me?
right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's never getting to you. So yeah,
Yeah.
and then I love the partners who would be honest and say, "Look, I only need two things from you: stuff, stuff, and intelligence. That's all I need. I don't want to talk to you about anything else because you don't understand where I live and you don't understand what's going on. And every idea you have or your country has is a bad idea."
Right.
I had a 2-star general who would tell me I need stuff and intelligence. And if you won't give me those things, I don't want to have a conversation with you.
Yeah.
And so I still had conversations with him because I'm a nice guy. And I'm like, okay, cool. Let's just talk about soccer or whatever.
Yeah.
And over time, I could get information from him. And I could at least tell the Americans this is how they see the world.
Right.
And so we would be developing a plan. The J3 is developing a plan, and I would go raise my hand and go, that's never going to work. Why? Because this guy believes this, and this guy believes this, and this guy believes this. But we would go ahead and develop the plan because somebody at echelons above, at the COCOM level,
Right.
was getting political pressure from Department of State to make a thing happen. And they needed social media moments. They needed to show the world that, hey, this is working. It's pretty funny. If you go look at some of the DoD web pages, they'll have a big announcement and they get 43 views.
Yeah.
And they got
And
they got
that's
hundred thousands of dollars a year budget
that's what's
because
driving there. Yeah. It's true.
no one buys what they're selling.
Yeah.
Everybody knows is they don't buy what they're selling.
So I want to
You look
slide
at some
over.
Iranian stuff. You look at some
Oh,
Iranian stuff, man, and they're getting nasty and dirty, and they got 1 million views because they're getting
yeah.
nasty and dirty. And the U.S. is being all clean, and we don't want to offend anybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of the Department of State, the things that they post are just so outlandishly ridiculous. There'll be an explosion in the city and 32 people get killed, and there will be a Department of State person saying, I received 17 soccer balls from children in Newport, Connecticut today, and we're so happy to get them.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
totally out of freaking touch.
I
Yeah.
just, oh man, it drives me crazy. Like when that person from state is telling you how things are, and you're like, are you kidding me? They're like, I've seen the rose gardens of Alexander. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, you're adorable. You went on a field trip. That's great. How are you going to help
It's all good.
Cheryl Lee? Like that. Yeah, you got real good words coming out of your mouth, but you're not even allowed to leave the compound. So let's get serious about this. So I
No,
want
they're
to
the
ask
ones.
you. Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I want to ask you about Syria because you see we don't see anything anymore. We don't care about Syria. That's the God's honest truth, right? Like, oh my gosh, we feel bad that there's people on the flotilla trying to get from Syria to someplace that's not Syria. And then we forget about that, and that's been years now. And then now there's an earthquake, and oh gosh, we feel for Syria and everything. And then there's the ISIS runs through all these problems, but no one gives a fuck about Syria. I mean, they just don't, right? No matter how important that place is historically and everything else, we and it's just an example of, in general, like
Well,
our investment.
people
Yes.
should care. Americans should care. The West should care about Syria because it's become a highway for Hezbollah to pass equipment and drugs, which they make money off of. So
Hmm.
again, see, they're not like we talk about the U.S. exports terrorism. Well,
Hmm.
Hezbollah does too. So if we're doing it, they're doing it too, right?
Yeah.
And they just do it better than we do. They're better at it. Hezbollah kicks our ass, man.
Yeah.
Uh, they have a business model, right? They got a business model. They sell. It's the old IRA model. The IRA started doing this, when they lost their political reason for being because Ireland got created. The IRA didn't want to stop being the IRA, and so they got support from the Soviet Union. And when that ended, they just started selling drugs. And the IRA is still around. A bunch of idiots, but they're still around. And so FARC, I think finally FARC folded. They finally capitulated, but they went into the drug business too. Hezbollah's in the drug business in a big way. And Syria is now a superhighway into that region, that's full of Palestinians who are angry at Israelis, and they're a
Yeah.
destabilizer because they want they want a Shia version of the world that's anti-Western.
Mm.
It's anti-Western. So I had a buddy who described the IRGC and Iranian politics as he said it's Marxism with a Shia twist, you
Mm.
know, and these
Yes.
guys, yeah, Marxism with a Shia twist, and really bright fellow. He works, for an agency who does nothing but study Iran, but people should care about Syria. It's just that they have other things that are more important. Everybody's worried about Ukraine. It shifted the focus. Uh, People are worried about Wagner because Wagner supports Russia, which is in the Ukraine. People are worried about China because what China is doing economically. with dime, the military model of how you use the instruments of national power or international power,
Hmm.
diplomacy, information, military, economics. The Chinese, economic. It's what they're doing. They are using the economic pillar to further their national interests in ways the Americans have not done since before 1930. We did it before 1930. We don't do it anymore because now we're above all that. However, you see the new presidents. There's a thing called the Committee on Foreign Investment U.S. CFIUS, and CFIUS has gotten spun back up. They're a lot more active today than they were pre 2018, and it's
Mm.
because it's a response to what China's doing. Action, reaction. It's a reaction. Uh, but yeah, Syria is a whole. Uh, there are 100,000 refugees in some large camps there, the Al Hol camp,
Hmm.
uh, and they're ISIS, the families of ISIS fighters that are left in these camps. And so the EU and NATO cares about, because we believe in human rights and the dignity of human life, that sanctity, that sort of stuff, and so we really do believe it. We're trying to make sure that those people just are not ignored. The problem is the camps are in Syria, and the Syrian government doesn't give a bleep about them. The Syrian government says these are the families of people we're at war with. For all we care, they can die. And the Iraqis a lot of ISIS people were Iraqi. They were Sunni Iraqis, as a matter of fact. And these are the survivors. And we're going to tell the Americans we care, but the probability is we really want them to stay in Syria. We don't want them to come back.
Yeah.
And so the only people who want to move the people out of the camps into host families or host nations where the family can move and live and prosper, it's the Westerners. So once again, the Westerners are pushing a Western agenda into a space that in a way that doesn't resonate with the locals. I mean, the UN doesn't even want to touch this, you know, and when the
Wow.
UN doesn't want to touch something, and they're in the business of refugee camping, that's a bad indicator. It's not
Yeah.
a good indicator. Turks don't want them.
Yeah.
Syrians don't want them. Iraqis don't want them. Turks don't want them. Jordanians don't want them. Uh, I could be blunter about it. The Syrians want those people to stop breathing. The Iraqis probably want them to stop breathing. The Turks, because they're a lot more brutal about it than we are. They
Right.
think about stuff that way.
When they've got a history
Anyway.
that goes back further than ours does, and so they think
Oh yeah,
about, look, there's always room to kill people. Like,
yeah, yeah.
it's just how that goes.
The way you get
But
victory is they stop breathing. It's victory.
yeah, right. So when you look at Iraq and where they're headed and where they're at now, is has there been any, like, there was a point in time where I was pretty positive it was going to take a while on Iraq, but everything I hear now is sort of just like it's just it's unstable as always, but there's a lot of resources there, so people are making money, and it's not a stable place, but still has the good bones to do something.
So it is stable in an unstable way. So it's
Hmm.
interesting. Iraq is better off today than it was 5 years ago, and the reason is they have energy wealth, oil and natural
Right.
gas. They have wealth, um, and they haven't had a major civil war since really 18, right?
Hmm.
Uh, the problem is it's balkanized. Iraq is increasingly balkanized. It has a very weak central government. The Constitution makes it weak. But anyway, you have the KDL. Um, so Iraq split into the Kurdistan in the north, and then what we'll call Arab Iraq, Kurdish north and Arab Iraq in the south. And so the Kurdish north is pretty deadgum stable. There are two
Right.
major factions that kind of run the railroad there, but it's pretty stable. You can go up there and you can start a business, and you're going to have to pay the formal and informal taxes to have a business, but you're relatively certain that what you do today, the law's not going to, there's not going to be a major change in the law in the next 24 months. They're not going to privatize your stuff or anything like that. You go south of the KDL, and I say it's balkanized because of this. There's a thing called the PMF. And when ISIS came into power in 13, people probably know this. ISIS came into power in 13. They really started rolling in 14. More than 60% of the Iraqi army that we had trained from 04 up until 14, they dropped their weapons and walked off the job. And so what happened is the Iraqi people looked at the Iraqi army as an institution, which we'd been trying to create into a Western army, and they realized they could not trust the army. Right? 10 years of U.S. training and European NATO training failed miserably. That litmus said it failed. So what happened is the guy, Ayatollah Sistani he's the leading Shia religious personality in Iraq. He issued a fatwa. He said all able-bodied men must go and fight ISIS. And so all of these Shia militias sprang into life. And it's the Shia militias really that defeated ISIS. It's not the Iraqi army. The Iraqi counterterrorism service played a crucial role in that because they were a small component of the Iraqi army that was very highly trained by the Americans and very good at what they did. So you really had the Iraqi counterterrorism service as the pointy tip of the spear, and the militias were the other guys who kind of won. Well, anytime you have a war, the war ends, the militia doesn't want to go home. And the militias were funded by the Iranians. The Iranians funded Shia militias. And so what they did is they created a bunch of little Hezbollahs. They got different names. There's a lot of internecine politics going on. But come the end of the day, it's a bunch of little bitty Hezbollahs. And so out in western Iraq, you'll have KH, Katiba Hezbollah. And in Baghdad, you'll have Muqtada al-Sadr's militias, and then competing Iranian-funded militias, AAH, people like that down south. So if you wanted to drive an oil tanker truck from Baghdad to Syria, you'd get on an Iraqi highway that would be in better condition today than it was in 2008. Not as a good a condition as it was before we went to war with Saddam. The highways were better under Saddam. But anyway, it'd be better than it was in the past 10 years. But you'd get stopped at half a dozen checkpoints. It's like the Afghan trucking mafia. And you'd have to pay Hezbollah here, Hezbollah there, Hezbollah there. And the PMF, the Popular Mobilization Front, so the PMF, that's what they're called. The PMF is like an Iraqi National Guard. They're all local dudes who got together, got some weapons, and went and fought ISIS. And when the war ended, they didn't want to go home. So they've been funded by Iran. Iran pays more money to fund the PMF than the West pays to fund the Iraqi army. So the PMF is actually stronger than the army. They're part of the government now, but they don't belong to MOD. So even though they're part of the government, that means they get some tax dollars from the government, but they still get funded by Iran. And the Iranians, if you're in charge of, the PMF for, what would it be, Hackensack, New Jersey, the Iranians would give you $5 million up front and some money for your dudes every month. And they say, okay, take this $5 million and go buy a business and start a business. And with the profits from that business, pump them back into your militia. So what they do is they go out, I'm not kidding, and they buy liquor stores. So they go in the liquor business because Vice sells. And then they get into the narcotics trafficking business, and they start selling narcotics. And that initial $5 million, the Iranians call it seed money. It's seed money for your militia. So your militia becomes a criminal organization, and it becomes a commercial organization. And of course, you're going to go hire a couple of doctors and open a clinic. And so they will say that they are socio-cultural movements. We're a movement. We're not a militia, we're a movement. And they'll create their own little competing government that competes with the Arab Iraqi government south of the border. North of the border, you don't have that problem. So if you're the PM, if you're the prime minister of Iraq, you have a really hard time building consensus and getting anything done. And so periodically you'll have the young kids will revolt and get out in the street and riot. I was there in August of 2022 when there was a huge series of riots and in Baghdad, and these kids took over the parliament building and they took over the government centers. And it was the PMF that showed up and killed them and killed
Wow.
them and
Jesus.
took the buildings back while the army stood back and did nothing. Because everybody knows if the PMF took on the army, the PMF would kick the army's rear.
Mm.
They'd kick their rear because they fought ISIS. So they're combat veterans. They're better funded and better equipped by the Iranians than the Iraqi army is by the West. Because the
Yeah.
Iraqi army it's propped up by the West. And of course, we have all these ethical rules and stuff. And these, anyway.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was the PMF. So now, if you're think about your average redneck Texan who sees a riot in Washington, D.C. and goes, man, somebody ought to do something about that riot. And it's not the army that goes in and solves the problem, but it's some local militia dudes.
Yeah.
Well, if you're a redneck in Texas, and I can say that because I'm a redneck from Texas, if you're a redneck, you go, man, the people we ought to trust is them militia guys, not them army guys.
That's right.
So the PMF, by the army staying back and out of the fray, actually increased the esteem and reputation of the PMF in the eyes of the average Iraqi citizen. So when you poll the Iraqis and go, if something happened, who could you trust or who could you rely on? Who could you rely on to
Right.
protect Iraq? People, 80% go, oh, the PMF. What about the army? Nah, they'll throw their guns down and go home.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I mean, that's completely believable, right? This
yeah,
is a funny thing.
yeah.
um, and it's very
So
much
wait,
like our own history too, by the way, with mob doing like hey, yeah, we're going to make sure people who don't have money. We're going
yeah,
to feed people, and it's an
yeah,
informal government, but they would call it the government, is what they would call that.
that's right. So when I would sit down with these Iraqis and talk about engaging with them, uh, because I'm an old guy and I have experience, you're talking to an Iraqi minister of treasury. And that guy has a cousin in the PMF. So if you go in
Hmm.
and you bang on the PMF, you're banging on his cousin. Now he knows his
Right.
cousin's not perfect. He knows his cousin's up to
Right.
some shenanigans. He's making some money off of meth. He knows that. But don't bang on his cousin.
Yeah.
And he figures it's his problem to handle the cousin. Well, your 27-year-old Marine cannot have that conversation.
No.
But
No.
I can sit down and go, you guys are kind of like the National Guard in the United States. It's kind of what you're like. What's that? Oh, it's a militia. It's a bunch of local dudes. They get together, they do some stuff, and if there's a war, they go fight a war. And they go, yeah, that's exactly what we are. And then that's the entree to the conversation.
Sure.
But it's, the skill set. Again, you go back to take it back around the skill set. But
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you, Iran is increasingly in control of Iraq because they increasingly control Iraq. They increasingly control Syria. And since they increasingly control Syria, they increasingly control Palestine. And since they increasingly control Palestine, see what I mean?
Yeah.
Uh,
No, for sure.
yeah, yeah. And
It,
23 ODAs, whatever the number is, right? 23 is not the number. But hypothetically, 23 ODAs spread between Syria and Iraq cannot stop what the Iranians are doing. In Iraq, it's a sovereign nation.
right.
Sovereign nation. So we can't do anything unless the nation says we can. And the government now is controlled by an Iranian leaning prime minister who has said, you
Yeah.
guys can't do anything.
Yeah.
So Iranian oil is flowing out of Iran in tanker trucks into Kurdistan. It goes into big oil tanks. It gets mixed with Kurdish oil. It goes up into Turkey and it gets sold on the market. So anybody who thinks sanctions against Iranian oil is working is
No.
either just preaching the party line because they want to get promoted or they want to, union work or they want to retire. But that's absolutely going on. Syrian oil is going into Iraq, mixed into Iraqi tanks, and then put in a truck, taken down to the Shah al Arab, and sold out into the market. So they launder oil. Iraq launders oil and natural gas. That's one of the ways they make money. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good times.
Well, it is good times. Why? Let me back up. Let me ask that question. We do have some regional partners that are pretty solidly on our side in most cases. We might have some disagreements or anything, but Israel, Jordan, these are places where we can reliably, say, hey, it's working there, right? And maybe there are some other ones that aren't quite as good as those guys, but there's some pretty good partnerships. The small countries out in the on the Red Sea side, those guys do pretty well.
Yeah.
They're transitioning,
Yeah.
but are we capable of improving that number to get, I don't know, Lebanon to go the right direction? Or
Look, Jordan does well not because of anything the West did, but because the Jordanians did it.
Mm,
And Israel does well because the Israelis did it. The Zionists did it. I mean that in a complimentary way. They did it.
sure.
Uh, Lebanon has amazing corruption problems. Uh,
Mm,
that's a diatribe in and of itself. Uh, again, the smartest thing to do, it's Kissinger's realpolitik, and what's in the interest of U.S. national security is just in our interest. And don't worry about ethics. Ethics go out the
mm,
door. They got to go out the door. And so, the smartest thing you can absolutely influence outcomes in a way that suit our national security interest. But the way you do it is you pick the right horse. You pick the horse and you support the local horse who is most in tune with what you need to get out of that space. And you do not try to micromanage it. You don't get down into the weeds. Don't get down that we have failed at that for 20 years
mm,
now. Don't get into the weeds. Now, you need to be in the weeds with regard to information collection. You need to know what's really going on in the space. So you have to have those people out there who are initiative, risk takers, uh, and willing to accept the other's version of the world, their truth for how things are, because that information has to get fed back up. That's your quality assurance piece. It's how
hmm
you first of all build a baseline for the population you're trying to influence, and how you measure changes in the baseline of the population you're trying to influence. So you need to do that, but don't get into the weeds on, you know, whether, no kidding, does the Iraqi army have a legal process that punishes soldiers in accordance with due process and equal protection? Who gives an F? It's their army. Let them do it their way.
Yeah.
Let them do it their way.
Right.
But we have federal laws that are now longstanding that say can't work with somebody if we determine that they're corrupt or they've human rights violation or whatever the case is. And
Yeah.
in my humble opinion, that needs to go out, because it's since we've started doing that, we sure have lost a lot.
Yeah. We got a problem with losing. Yeah,
We've lost a lot, man.
we have. It's hard to point
Thank you,
to
baby.
generals and admirals who have won. You know, and if not them, if
We,
it's not their fault. Now, Xander
well,
would say we won in Iraq, that
in
we
low
did the
intensity
things we were supposed to do.
in low intensity conflict. So the ISIS rose to the level that they were. It's conventional operations.
Hmm
We win at conventional operations, near peer stuff, man. We're going to be good. Big, the division rolls through. We're talking about low intensity conflict here. Is how do we, when the total war thing for that nation is over, how do you win the peace? How do you
Right.
transition, win the peace, and develop a space that's stable, that we can rely on as a partner? We don't just want a stable space. We want a stable space that we can rely on with as partner. I've had conversations with Department of State people about Iraq, and they're like, it's stable. And I'm like, yeah, but it's stable and leans towards Iran. That's not what we want. We
Right.
want stable and leans towards Jordan, stable and leans toward the Gulf,
Yeah.
stable and leans towards, actually, the truth is stable and leans towards us. It's our taxpayer dollars we're spending. I don't want stable and leans towards Jordan. I want stable and leans toward America. Now, if it's Jordan is a transitory step on the way to the U.S., I'm down with that. But that's got to be part of the plan. Yeah. So, no, really, they really said, yeah, but it's stable now. We don't want to mess
Yeah.
with the instability. And I said, no, we need a coup. We need a coup
Love it.
because the
Yeah.
Iranians are going to take it, and you're going to give it to the Iranians. And guess what?
Yeah.
Iranians have taken it with the vote.
Well, and the
Iranians
Iranians
vote.
did a brilliant thing. They took a lot of our failed work and said, "Here, let me help you out.
Yeah,
Here, let me help you out."
they
And
just
so, as much as the Iraqis hated all of them, even the Shia hated Iranian influence, it was better than what they were left with. And
yeah,
so, they,
that's right.
they what we always tried to
You'd
do
be
was,
amazed at how many Shia guys I've met who say we need Saddam back.
yeah, agreed. I've heard that a lot
Isn't that
too.
crazy? Because stable, and they had
Hmm.
an upward trajectory. They were graduating doctors, engineers. They had good roads. They had a social security system. They had a social welfare system. I remember in 04, 05, 05 when I was in the all in bar, this truck would would rumble down the road into the village, stop, tailgate came down, and they would throw out bags of rice. I was like, "What the
Hmm.
is this?" And they go, "Everybody gets rice." What do you
Everybody
mean?
gets rice.
Yeah,
Everybody gets oil. Yeah,
we've always gotten rice. We've always
yeah,
gotten rice. They got rice. They got salt. They got rice, salt, a little bit of flour. They got some staples,
yeah,
and
yeah.
this, you know, we would go, man, that's not much, but for them,
Right. Yeah.
er, that's
We
a technical term. Er,
Nope. I would look for those dudes, the guys who were like
Yeah,
the aid office. Like, hey, yeah, no, of course, everybody comes here, everybody gets a gallon of oil, everybody gets this much
that's right.
flour. Because you
That's
know what
right.
that dude
Oh, and
knew?
you remember when we went?
Yeah.
Do you remember when we went into villages? The civil affairs teams went into the villages in Afghanistan, and they gave out cooking oil and blankets. And then the
Uh,
next day, the number of attacks went through the roof because we had put the cooking oil salesman out of business because we were dumbasses. Remember
yeah.
that?
Uh, it's so
Again,
bad.
trying to do something at the local level. Local level.
Yeah.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
USA. USA.
Yeah. It's that all of that is bad, especially when like there is an existing system. And here's the biggest problem is that no one took the time to say, what's the existing system? Well, do these guys already have aid? Oh, they do? Oh,
Yeah.
goodness gracious. Oh, great. Like one of the ways I made a lot of my money, John, was just saying, what is the simplest problem that we should be able to solve today? What is this dumbest thing? You're like, this pisses me off. And then if I was, and
Yeah.
I had to make my mistakes to get to the graduate level of this, and the person would say, move some concrete. Any commander in the battlefield can move concrete wherever he wants. He's got tools for that. And so you go,
Yeah.
okay, great.
Yeah.
And you go back to the boss and you're like, this is one problem we could solve this week. And the commander's like, great. How do we approach this? You're like, well, I told the farmer to go see the governor. The governor's going to see you. You're going to be like, Nam Sadie, and you're just going to do it. And he's like, I love it. Tell so and so to
Yeah.
get it done. And next thing you know, the governor is walking with that farmer, dun, 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 hand in hand. And then I get to go back a week later and say, hey, what was the last thing the government did around here? And they go, you know
Yeah.
what? They moved that annoying piece of concrete. They went down to the
Yeah. There,
commander of the army and they told him what to do, and he did it.
he did it.
And
There you go.
how can I do this
Small
again?
victory.
Like, yeah. And so I'm like, how do I do this again? How do I do this like every 10 days? How do I give them something so that they start to
Small
go to
victory.
that guy? And I started to get the ability to make the Afghans show up to the government center and be like, hey, that road you guys fixed 4 months ago with the army, it's rutted again. Could you ask them? And they started to
Great.
make requests. And I'm like, but then I had to go home.
Yeah. There you
Then I
go.
had to go home.
Yeah.
And then we left altogether. It's like, we were so
It's why
close.
I'm telling you. So yeah, 1 year, 1 year at a time. Again, it's a reason to
Yeah.
contract it.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
5 year
1 year
contract.
with total amnesia or no awareness at all that anything
Yeah.
has ever happened there before. They just show up like, and nobody has the same job. You know how this works. Like, hey, I'm deployed again. Last time I was I don't know. I was working in the 3 shop making slides. Now I'm running a platoon. you know. And then the next time you come back, you're like, I'm a captain now, and now I'm
Yeah.
working in the battalion ops off, and like they've never done the same job twice in that place, and so they have no idea. You wouldn't run a refinery that way. You would just go, "This is
Again,
your job." Yeah,
again, again, it's a reason to contract it, or at
yeah,
least the information collection, the
right,
information collection, right? Uh,
yeah,
the other
yeah,
stuff, you're just you're never going to get there, right? So that's okay. But if you have a series of information collectors who are experienced, um, they understand what the desired end state is, and you give them the time to be tactically patient, to elicit
yes,
the information, and develop
right,
the relationships, develop the,
yeah,
and so I've been with soft teams before who had a missions to do X, and they're failing at that mission because the partner force doesn't want to do the mission. They don't want to do it. I would just say, okay, none of that matters. Here's what matters: access and placement.
yeah,
No matter what you do, your job is to develop relationships with these people so that in 10 years, we can get a benefit from having a relationship. So if they don't want to learn how to, you know, Halo, or they don't want to learn how to do X, don't worry about it. Don't
yeah,
sweat that.
right,
Just develop a good relationship with them. That's the
yeah,
most important thing. And so you're doing information collection. If you're not getting the information out of the person you're trying to elicit from or from that space, don't worry. I don't want to say don't worry about it. Still keep working on it. But the most important thing is to maintain the relationship for access and placement. That's what you do. And if you can maintain, enhance, and increase access and placement, then you will win over time. Because in a crisis, you can you can poke those little belly buttons and go
hmm
back out to the relationships you built and learn what the heck is going on. And before you know it, it's real value added. It's one thing to
what,
have technical means to collect information,
right,
listen phone calls or whatever. But listening to a phone call doesn't give you the context for why. Why are they having this conversation?
yeah,
Why is Case Khazali saying this thing? Why is Muqtada al-Sadr saying this thing? And the way you get the way that you can understand and contextualize what's happening is if you have a real relationship with them and you can sit down face to face and go, all right, explain to me why this is going on. I don't understand.
yeah,
Here's what because the truth is, if you're working for the Americans, they're a player. Americans are a player.
right,
So people will share information with you if they believe you're trustworthy. You don't have to be on the same team, but if you're trustworthy,
yeah,
they people from less developed space always prefer to cut a deal first. They always want to cut a deal. And so that's an opportunity to have conversations and maybe cut deals.
yeah.
If you can't, just are honest
It's
and you
it's
can't.
qualifying your sale, ahead of time. The thing you said is a very advanced collection thing. So there's two things I want to talk about with collection real quick. And I'm going to use T.E. Lawrence in this because this is where I think part of his wonderful success, we all want to be that guy. The problem was is when he came back, who the fuck are you? He didn't
Oh,
exist. I mean, sure, he had a couple allies, but you have to work both ends of that equation. You have to always work. And I would say the military side more, because when you're coming back with these alternate realities and saying, no, I don't think that's going to work like that, you have to
yeah,
have credibility. And Intel guys always think, oh, I got credit. Everybody cares about my product. No, they don't. If the boss isn't saying, sit down with us and help us understand what's going on,
yeah,
if they're not giving you more to do than you could possibly do,
yeah.
then you're not relevant. And so you have to solve that side of the equation. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how good you are at collecting. And I would say most people aren't good enough at collecting for that anyhow, because they don't have again, you don't stay at the ground level like we have. The other thing I would say, and this is very advanced
Yeah.
for spy collection, is, we're always looking for placement and access. And they say you don't create your own. That is wrong. If you're advanced, you can create your own
You do.
access.
You
You do.
totally do.
And that's
You
that's not
do.
what the book says, but it's exactly what we do. And
No,
so I can't say I will go meet the right people, and you will never have a chance to ever meet these people, because I will create the placement and access, because I'm not gonna fucking care what you
you
want,
start
because what
with,
you want I have to go get
hey,
myself.
hey, that's right. Okay, so back in the day, I wanted to know some stuff.
Right.
And so, you know, for whatever stupid reason, I got to go to law school back in the day. And so I wanted to know some stuff, and I was looking around, and I talked to some guys about judges. Hey man, who's in the area? What's here? And the judge who prosecuted Saddam Hussein lived in the town where I was. And I went, I want to meet that guy. That was not my job. I didn't have squat to do with that. But I said, I want to meet that guy. So I told them, go tell this guy there's an American lawyer who wants to meet you and talk to you about the law and business. So I got an entree, and I went and met this guy, and I developed, because I developed a relationship with him. I developed access to him.
Yes.
And he gave me placement with the mayor, the governor, the whatever. And of course, I went to the guy who owned the pharmaceutical company, because I told him I was interested in business. The pharmaceutical company, which took me to another guy, and I was able to map out the whole informal militia tax network in that space because of these guys.
Yeah.
I said, hey, if I wanted to go into business, should I do it? And the judge is like, no, don't go into this business, or this business, because the taxes are too high. Oh, really? What are the taxes? Well, what business should I go into? Go into pharmaceuticals. Oh, wow. Is there anybody here? Yeah, that guy. Went over and talked to that guy. Okay, cool. Well, okay, if we were to do that, if we could get some American investors, how would that work? Oh, you know what I mean? And so I developed. That's what I mean by initiative.
Yeah.
And a willingness to assume a little risk. Initiative with risk. The rules said those aren't my people.
Yeah.
I didn't give a fuck. Did not give a fuck.
Can't.
Went over and met them.
Yeah.
And then you're going back to this team and you're saying, I know this, I know this, I know this, I know this, I know this. And they're like, how the hell do you learn that? I got in a car and drove over there.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to get in a car. You're supposed to be in a Humvee. No, I just got in a Corolla and went over there.
Yeah. I went over there.
Who'd you take?
Yeah.
A linguist.
Yeah. Not only that, I was respectful, and I said, hey, Judge, I'd love to come see you again. Are you cool with that? Yeah, I'd love to have you over.
Absolutely.
Why don't you come to my house?
Absolutely. We had coffee talk.
Right. Yeah. What day and time would you like me to show up, and how would you like me to get there? I'll send my guys 2 p.m. on Friday.
Oh, wait.
Okay. Yeah.
Then I started blowing off my American meetings for my local national meetings. Sorry, I can't be there. Sorry, I can't be there. I got a meeting. I got a thing. Anyway.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, look.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to hang up on this thing, man.
All right. Let's do it. Hey, I appreciate you coming on, John. It was really awesome talking to you. Hopefully everybody else got a big kick out of it. I'm going to run the credits here. Stand by for 30 seconds. I'll be right back. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to.